friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read at the end of the month of August. During my mid-month wrap-up, I did talk about the first 4 books that I read in the month. The Biggest Story by Kevin DeYoung, illustrated by Don Clark. This has gorgeous illustrations. I talked about Assassin's Quest, which is the 3rd book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. Loved it. Glad I finished that. And Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which I listened to on audiobook and was my first book for Austen August. And then also Us Against You by Frederick Bachman, which is the follow-up to Beartown and is spectacular. So those 4 is what I started off during the first half of the month of August, and now I have 8 more books to talk about. The first 3 that I'm going to talk about were the 3 books that I read for Austen August. Well, 3 more books that I read other than Pride and Prejudice. I read the historical fiction Just Jane by Nancy Moser. This is a Christian fiction retelling of Jane Austen's life, really. It talks about the closeness with her sister Cassandra, kind of her unrequited love for this fella when she was quite young, and just her process of writing and trying to get published and what that was like. Just the closeness of her family. It was really nice to read the story of Jane's life. It didn't blow me away, and honestly a couple parts were a little bit boring for me. So I think I gave this 3 stars, but I enjoyed it and am glad that I read a story of her life. However, then I read The Jane Austen Project by Kathleen A. Flynn, and while this is well loved by a lot of people, I actually recently listened to a podcast where one of the people was raving and just absolutely loved this book. For me, this was quite a miss. I actually only gave it 2 stars, which means it was just okay. I did finish it, so that's something. I did really like the glimpse that we got of 1815, kind of from a modern perspective, what that might have been like. I feel like that could have been fleshed out a little bit more. I enjoyed meeting Jane Austen and her family. I did not like the main protagonists, either of them, Rachel and Liam. In this book, Rachel and Liam come from a future where time travel is possible and happens kind of on a regular basis. And there was some die-off where we don't really learn enough about the future world. They mention this die-off, which just means there's not meat or animals, maybe? Yeah, we don't really know what that means because we don't get a big enough picture of the future world before these 2, Rachel and Liam, travel back to 1815. They become part of this project to rescue the completed manuscript of the Watsons and also some of her letters, and kind of side project to try to figure out what illness ended up taking Jane's life. Rachel is a doctor in the future world, but when she goes back to 1815, women can't be doctors. So Liam poses as a doctor and kind of works through what Rachel tells him to say and figures out things based on what she tells him to look for and such. They do have a bit of a romance, but I did not like the chemistry between them. I found Rachel to be overly focused on sex in general, and just thinking about it all the time, and it just seemed very out of place, and I really did not like that. I didn't believe the build-up to their relationship, between Liam and Rachel's relationship. They didn't have enough conversation. They didn't have enough tension. There wasn't flirtation. It was just all of a sudden, we're gonna be sleeping together. So yeah, I didn't believe it. I didn't think there was any character development, but there were aspects that I liked, like the 1815 setting. And then the ending to me was super confusing and just opened up way too many doors and opened up way too many questions and didn't give enough answers. And it just seemed choppy and just strange and confusing. So yes, I really didn't care for this. 2 stars, and I will be unhauling this one. Then the 3rd one that I read was a bit lighter. I read Persuasion, Captain Wentworth, and Crackling Cornbread by Mary Jane Hathaway. This is a Southern retelling of Persuasion. And in this one, our main character, Lucy Crawford, is a wealthy African-American woman who is obsessed with Civil War history. She actually works at this little tiny museum in her hometown and organizes reenactments and is into she lives in a Civil War era home. Her long lost high school love becomes a doctor and comes back home to work in this clinic that ends up renting part of Lucy's home to save Lucy's family some money or earn them some money, but also it kind of puts Lucy and Jeremiah back in each other's lives, and we see what happens when they get back together. So this is kind of a mashup of fans of Jane Austen and fans of Civil War history. So it was kind of fun the way that those two things blended together in this book. 3 stars though, nothing blowing my mind with that either. But then I read some fantastic books towards the end of the month. I listened to another audiobook. It was The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, and I cannot remember the name, so here is the picture of that. This was a fantastic audiobook about the Blue people of the Appalachian Hills in Kentucky, and also the WPA, Works Progress Administration by Franklin Roosevelt after one of the wars. Oh my word, I can't remember the time period. But they hired people to be pack horse librarians and kind of come into town and collect books and then bring them up into the mountains and the hills to deliver to people so that they have access to reading material. I did a lot of kind of Google spiral after finishing this book, looking up the Blue people and looking up pack horse librarians, and super interesting. And just, I love the way that these two things were combined. Anyways, we follow the main character whose name I can never remember main character's name. Oh wait, they called her Bluet, Cussy Mary. I do remember her name. Some people called her Bluet and some people called her name was Cussy Mary. Cussy Mary was a pack horse librarian, but she was also very ostracized and mocked and looked down upon because she was the last remaining Blue person in this area. She faced a lot of stuff. She faced a lot of racism ultimately because of the way that she looked and she had no control over. And it turns out it is a real blood disorder where your blood is like a dark chocolate brown, which makes your skin tone kind of blue. Anyways, it was a fantastic story. I think I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it and I would highly recommend it. For my Goodreads read-along group, I did read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, and I was surprised to like this a lot better than I thought I did. I ended up giving it 4 stars. This is broken up into 3 different sections, and I really enjoyed the first 2 sections, but the third section I was a little less into, I guess, because we follow our main character, Sunja. Yes, I'm doing good with names today. We follow Sunja from the beginning of the story. She is quite a young girl growing up on an island in Korea. Her mother and father run an inn, and she helps at the inn. We follow Sunja and her generations after her. So her sons and their lives, and then her son's children a little bit. And so I really liked Sunja and her story and her mother and the sister-in-law and brother-in-law that she ends up living with in Japan. I loved learning about what life was like for Koreans in Japan and then Japanese Koreans, Korean Japanese, like the children that are born in Japan and still because of their Korean blood, how they are looked down upon, and a lot of racism that exists between those two nations. It was super interesting to learn about that, but by the end, we are following Sunja's grandson and his kind of love life in a sense, and I didn't care for the women there or him as much either. I liked reading and learning about Sunja, but I did like this much more than I thought I would. I loved hearing what other people thought in the read-along group on Goodreads, and I'm really glad that I read it. It's a bit chunky, but it flew by. I just was expecting it to be much slower paced, but I really enjoyed reading through this, and it was good. 4 stars. Then I read If You Want to Make God Laugh by Bianca Marais, and I did give this 5 stars. I just love Bianca Marais as an author. I loved her book Hum If You Don't Know the Words, and I loved her book If You Want to Make God Laugh. It's kind of fun because characters from Hum make an appearance in here, which is really cool. But in this book, we follow 3 women, Ruth and Delilah and Zadwa. Ruth is kind of an ex-stripper, extreme, self-absorbed narcissist who is pretty selfish, but then really has a soft heart inside. And really, I loved all the character arcs of all 3 women, but then we follow Delilah, who is an excommunicated nun. We find out what happened there and why, and Ruth and Delilah are sisters, and they end up moving back into their family home, and they do not get along very well at the beginning. And then we follow Zadwa, who is a young Zulu girl who at the beginning of the book is very pregnant. She was raped and gives birth to the child, and her mom, thinking that she's doing the right thing, gives the child to Ruth and Delilah, leaves the child at their doorstep. And then these three women's lives become entwined, and each of them has a very distinct character arc and the way that their lives are all brought together. We deal in this book a lot with racism, a lot about family, a lot about HIV and the AIDS crisis. This takes place right at the end of apartheid. One of the scenes at the very beginning, which was so moving, was when Black people had the opportunity to vote for the first time. And there's a beautiful scene that's just heart-wrenching at the very beginning about that voting for the first time. We also deal with, like I said, the AIDS pandemic, which just wiped out so many people. This was really good. I really love Bianca Murray's writing style. The one thing that I didn't care for too much, the chapters in this are very, very, very short. So we're just getting a snippet, and we kind of bounce between these three women's perspective. And at the beginning, those short chapters are a little bit confusing because until they all kind of come together, they're in three different places and a little bit different timelines. So you have to really pay attention to each chapter heading, like kind of where we are and when we are. Eventually that smooths itself out and it is a little bit easier flow to it. But I did wish often for just a little bit more of each story. I just found the chapters a little bit too short at times, but so many quotes, so many points to ponder, so many thoughtful phrases and thoughtful commentaries on racism and about family and about love. Yeah, it just was beautiful. I think I'll read anything she writes. I do know that next she's gonna write a psychological thriller, which will be very interesting because that's so different from Hum and this one. But I really did love this book, so I'm so thrilled that I read it. Then I lightened things up a bit, and I read a contemporary romance that I had seen all over at Bookstagram, and that's Every Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. This is exactly my kind of contemporary romance. This book takes place in kind of a small town in Maine, and it's kind of the unlikely romance between Evie, who has lost her husband a couple years ago, and we learned right at the beginning that the day that her husband got in a car accident and died, she was planning to leave him. So she didn't tell anybody that because now he's dead and it doesn't matter, but everyone expects her to be grieving, and she is grieving in a sense, but not in the same way that everybody thinks. And so she feels kind of like a monster, that she's not grieving the loss of her husband and she's not missing him and wishing that he were back. So she's kind of working through all of these emotions. And then her best friend has a friend who is a failed pitcher in Major League Baseball who just wants to kind of escape a little bit. Something happened to his arm or something. He's unable to pitch anymore. And he just wants to escape all the drama and the paparazzi. Her friend kind of invites him to come to Maine, and he ends up living in the apartment in Evie's house. And of course, there's a romance between these two characters who are both dealing with some serious stuff. It's a really slow burn, but a lot of witty dialogue between them, a lot of banter back and forth, and a lot of tension, sexual tension between them, but there's actually no graphic sex in this one. It's a clean story overall. I really liked her friendship, but with, what's his name? Her best friend is Andy. Her best friend is Andy, and they're totally a platonic friendship, which I also loved. They have things they need to deal with in their friendship as well. I don't know, it just hit me in all the right places, this book. I just thoroughly enjoyed reading this one and ended up giving it 4 stars. And then I wrapped up the month. At the very end, I squeaked it out. I did finish Betsy and the Great World. I have not yet read Betsy's Wedding, but I was able to finish Betsy and the Great World. And this was a lot of fun. This takes place after Betsy has finished college, and she goes on kind of her continental tour. We start out with her boarding a ship, and she's headed to Europe, where she goes to Italy and Germany and France for a bit, I believe, and then ends up in London. And kind of the things that she learns and the people that she meets and her experiences that she has, it's so much fun. I absolutely love this, but I am very excited for the next one because I did barely start Betsy's Wedding, but I decided to set it down and save it for the end of the month if I have time for it. But I'm just really excited for Joe and Betsy because it's going to happen. I'm really sad and happy to be finishing up this series. It was so good. So I'm glad I squeaked that out. But that is it. 12 books again. 12 books again in the month of September. Nope, August. Which is awesome. I didn't think I was going to do it. And here we are 3 days into September and I have barely read anything except I've listened to a lot of The Count of Monte Cristo, which wasn't even in my TBR, but it is the audiobook that I've started. And I'm about 33% through that one, which is a lot of fun. But I would love to chat with you in the comments below if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts or questions about them. And please let me know what was one of your favorite books in the month of August. And that is it. So give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye!